here shortly. She's running a little late this evening. Mr. Soba is again at work and is excused for this evening. Moving on to item B, additions, deletions. There is none for tonight. Item C, general consent agenda. Can we have a motion for the general consent agenda?
I'll move.
Moved by Dr. Andriasco. Supported by Mr. Mixek. Anything on the general consent agenda that you'd like to have removed or comment or questions about by the board? Hearing none, can I have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Pyden?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to D from the community. Number slips here this evening from our community members. As always, we will just read some of the rules into the record before starting today. Public participation at board meetings. Attendees must register their intention to participate in the public portion of the meeting upon arrival at the meeting. Participants must be recognized by the are well aware of that. We yeah, it just went off. Each statement will be 5 minutes long, 1 minute warning prior to the end. Participants shall direct all comments to the board, not to staff or other participants. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. No person may address or question board members individually. Complaints against identifiable school personnel may not be expressed in an open meeting. Such complaints should first be submitted in writing to the board and aired in open or closed session according to the wish of the persons involved. The presiding officer may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant statement when the statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. Request any individuals to leave the meeting when that person does not observe reasonable decorum. Request assistance of law enforcement officers in the removal of a disorderly person when that person's conduct interferes with the orderly progress of the meeting. Call for a recess or adjournment to another time when the lack of public decorum so interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting as to warrant such action. Waive these rules with the approval of the board when necessary for the protection of privacy or the administration of the board's business. Okay, so very good. And we've been reading those for quite some time. Always very constructive criticism and comments by our communities. And so we look forward and thank you for coming tonight to share your comments. Okay, first tonight we will have Mr. Joel Ruhlman. Thank you for coming, Mr. Ruhlman. Please share your comments with the board.
Thank you. I was going to prepare a speech and I changed my mind last minute to do it. I just wanted to get my point across. I know the 2021-2022 school year, everybody's kind of unsure what it's going to look like with different guidance that's come from the CDC and whatnot. And it really hasn't been told to us what's going to happen. I just want to come out and let you guys know that I do not support my child wearing a mask in class. I have 2 children. My wife and I will be pulling our children from CVS if this is the case. You know, it's been a long year and I think we've all learned a lot, and I don't want to get into the science. We've all heard the science. There's science on both sides. Everybody has their way of viewing things, but let's do what's right. Let's get these kids back in the classroom. Let's give them a sense of normalcy. Let them see each other's faces, smiles, and, you know, just go back to normal. The quarantine's got to stop. There's no reason to do this with these kids. You know, they're kids, they're growing up. They just need to live normal lives and get the education that we all were lucky enough to have. And I hope you guys do the right thing. And when you guys discuss this, which I'm sure you will soon, there's been a lot of parents coming around here and I've heard every one of them for the past couple months opposing more masks, quarantines of the students. So start listening to us. I hear you guys saying you are, but your actions aren't reflecting what the will of the people are. The majority is what you're hearing in this room today. All my neighbors oppose anything that we do not want schooling to look like it did last year. And I'm sure you guys don't either. But we need to start getting that normalcy back, and we got to pick our time. This pandemic isn't going anywhere. It's going to be forever. Let's be honest. There's going to be variant after variant, and we're just going to have to learn to live with it, which we have. People are getting vaccinated. I heard today in the United States, there were 62 COVID deaths yesterday. 62 too many, obviously, but we've been in the right direction. Let's not force our kids to go through what they've went through. You know, they need their education. They need to see their friends. They need to be able to properly communicate with their teachers. Their teachers need to be able to see if a kid's struggling. And a mask is just hiding that. You guys all know that, you know, you're not dumb people. And I just hope you do the right thing, and let's seriously think about what you're going to do for the 2021, 2020. And please, I beg you, take all of what we're saying to heart, because we're not showing up like this to cause problems. We want what's best for our kids. And I know you do too. So I beg you to please do the right thing and at least let the parents make their choice. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rulon, for your. Okay, next up, we will have Fiona Zielinski. Hi, Ms. Zielinski. Thank you for coming, and please, the board.
My friends will be attending in-person school where they might have to wear a mask. I'll be online school this year. I am not 100% happy about this. I would love to see my friends at school, but I don't want to wear a mask. I have many things I wanted to do this year since it is my last year in elementary school. My friends are doing them, but I am not. I wish I could do 5th grade in school so bad. My mom doesn't want me wearing a mask and going to school. She's right. Last year is terrible. I hope you can consider making the masks optional for the kids in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. for your comments this evening. Ms. Rita Zielinski. Ms. Zielinski, thank you for coming this evening. Comments with the board.
Thank you. This board, along with the township, serves as the first tier of representation for the people. Its top priority, as well as all elected officials, is to secure the rights of the people. The independence movement started with James Otis Jr., a government employee who quit, not willing to participate in the overreach of the people. Quote, "Not only will I not participate, but I will not comply, and I will teach others the power of non-compliance." We have forgotten that the people rule over the government. The government was never intended to rule over the people. Samuel Adams said, "Among the natural rights of the colonists are life, liberty, and property, together with the right to support and defend them in the best manner you can." If you do not have an unquestionable individual right to these things, you are not free. The hierarchy is such. God created man, man created society, and society created government. Each step down has less power, and over time, this has become inverted. Today, we see the federal, state, and local governments operating outside their created authority and engaging in massive overreach to the destruction of our rights. So if they are operating outside of our consent with no just power, our silence and our compliance is our consent. It was only when the states, not the people, ratified the Constitution that the federal government was formed. Therefore, the federal government has no authority over anything not specifically listed in the Constitution. James Madison's Federalist 45 paper states, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those that remain in the states remain." Why? Because they started there in 1776. Delegated means temporary trust of responsibility or authority from a higher power to a lower power. States equal higher power, federal government equals lower power. And the condition of delegating power is to secure the people's rights. When you fail to do so, it's the people's duty and authority to take it back. If not specifically listed in the Constitution as an authority of the federal government, including the CDC, the EPA, the FDA, the Department of Education, Human and Health Services, FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, etc., the governing of all such agencies are reserved to the states. Reserved means the states can say no. If not, there is no limit to the federal government power, which means the state is not free. So this is where we're at. And the good news is that our state is still free on paper. The federal government is still limited in its authority on paper. And the Constitution is still a legal binding document for now. So the only thing that needs to change is us. When the federal, state, and local governments are exercising powers not delegated to them, they are violating the Constitution, which is the law of the land. Therefore, Congress writing a law, a president signing an executive order, an opinion from the Supreme Court that is not consistent with the Constitution cannot be binding by the states. And it's the state's duty to protect the people's rights. Jefferson made it clear, if you are not applying the Constitution with its original intent, your acts are null and void. The only reasons that we comply are: 1, we've been trained to and uneducated; 2, we are too comfortable; or 3, we are afraid. Peaceful noncompliance is the people enforcing the law of the land when the government is acting unlawfully. This holds true for mask mandates, forced vaccines, testing, shutting down schools, businesses, lockdowns, job loss from noncompliance. All unconstitutional, all null and void, unless we comply. As we continue to unite, recruit, and organize, the board needs to constitutionally represent its district's freedoms. Noncompliance is not a bad word. It is the duty and our obligation, not only for ourselves and our children, but the generations to come. Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberty or easily be subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." Thank you.
This evening. Okay, Monica Radko. Radko, thank you for coming this evening. Please share your comments with the board.
Today, I'm just going to share with you a survey that was created by myself and a few other parents. The survey was Parents Against Mandatory Masking and COVID Testing. This survey was filled out by 58 families that attend CVS or some families that already polled. So the question to these families were, how will the Chippewa Valley District's decision on masking and COVID testing impact your plans for the 2021-2022 school year? 55.2% said, and also this was out of 58 responses, 55.2% said, if masking or testing is required, we will not be sending our kids to Chippewa Valley. 25.9% said my children will attend Chippewa Valley schools without mask. 12.1% did not answer. 5.2% said that they have already pulled their kids from Chippewa Valley schools. And 1.7% said they have not made arrangements next year for the fall. There was also a spot for parents to leave comments. Here are some of their comments. I will not mask my child. We will not allow testing, and we will not allow my child to be vaxxed. Masking should be optional. I have 4 children in CVS. I will not have the mask the majority of the day. I will not continue to test a healthy child. Kids should not be wearing masks for school. Nope, kids are going back restriction-free 100% in September. Don't mess around with this again. It should be the parents' choice whether the kids wear masks to school and get tested. Testing, mask, and COVID vaccinations, especially for children, should be a parent's choice. I respect others who choose to mask or test their children. My children have been in CVS since preschool, but I've made alternative educational arrangements to pull them out of the district. Not doing the mask again this year, never again. These are our children, not yours. They are ours. We get to make the best decisions for them, not you. Our parental rights do not stop where the classroom door begins. Think about what you're doing, and we don't want to have to do this again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Radko, for comments this evening. I mean, you're free. Okay. Thank you for your comments. Yes. Okay. Great. Next up, we move to board. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Bednard. So this evening, we're going to be talking about 2 things as part of our workshop. One is curriculum and what our goals are for this year. And then also we're going to be talking about some of the federal money that's been made available to us through ESSERS. And we have what we're calling right now a very preliminary plan. This will be very high level regarding ESSERS because there's just some work that needs to be done on that, which we are doing. First, I'd like to start with last year being what it was. Our focus for most of the year, in fact, the entire year, was really about how school looked. And that's what we appeared to be spending all of our time on. While that is true, we spent a lot of time on how our educational, the delivery model we had for last year. Behind the scenes, there was a whole lot of curriculum work going on, which is so important. It was important that it not stop. And that is conducted by our Educational Services Department. So what I'm going to do is turn it over right now to Dr. Brodsky, who will give you a sort of a lead into some information that we'll present you this evening, because we want you to understand what it is we are working on, we have been working on, and we will be working on during this next school year. So Dr. Brodsky.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Before we begin, I'd like to just turn it over to our Executive Director of Technology, Sarah Monier-White, who will talk to you about our setup here at the front table and how our process will take place. Thank you.
I just wanted to let you know about the computers you have in front of you. The silver HPs are examples of our new one-to-one technology. These are the models that will be assigned to middle and high school students throughout the district. As Educational Services presents tonight, we'll be demonstrating some of the one-to-one software that we have available, talking about how one-to-one fits into our district priorities and moving learning forward. We do have Mrs. Dawn Barrett here today. If you run into a problem, nod her way or raise your hand and she'll be able to help you. But really the technology will be controlled by me. I'll walk you through the presentation. You will have a question pop up on your screen once in a while, and you can use your trackpad to click and answer that. That is just something available on the teacher computer, which is my computer. It's not available to the community or the public, but it's just demonstrating the software and what we can do as students. I just want to make sure you knew that before we began.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, good evening. And as Mr. Roberts mentioned, tonight's board workshop will focus on instructional priorities for the 2021-22 school year and beyond. You'll also be informed of how elementary and secondary school emergency relief, known as ESSER funding, will be allocated toward addressing the district priorities that have been developed. Our objectives for tonight's workshop are for you to gain a better understanding of the district's instructional priorities and the processes that we will use, namely collaborative teams and professional learning, to accomplish these priorities. Change the slide, please. These are our 4 district priorities. Guaranteed and viable curriculum and reading were initially developed pre-COVID with social, emotional learning and technology to support learning as a result of last year's extended COVID-19 learning plan and as we became a one-to-one district. The district priorities drive what we do in educational services and were presented to the board during the 2021 school year and during our Cognia accreditation engagement review this past spring. Change the slide, please. We'll begin by talking about guaranteed and viable curriculum, what it is, why it's important, and how we will work with our district staff to implement it for all of our students. And that will be presented by our Executive Director of Elementary Education, Marina Licari.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. It's a pleasure to be here with our team to kind of outline the 4 priorities that we have in place. We're excited about the work that we're doing, and we are truly looking forward to moving this work forward so that all of our students can succeed. I think we have a technology issue. I'm happy to proceed without the slides in front of me. If our audience can still see that and our board members can follow along on their laptops. Thank you, Sarah. And we roll with the punches. So when it comes to guaranteed and viable curriculum, that is our first initiative. And pre-pandemic, we actually had an opportunity to start this initiative. So as our board members can see on their laptops, our audience will be able to see on the smartboard that's being turned around, and obviously the audience at home can see on the screen. When we look at guaranteed and viable curriculum, the first question that comes to mind is, what is it and why is it important? So the why behind a guaranteed and viable curriculum is really to ensure that every student has the opportunity to learn a core curriculum and that it is viable, or that it can live, it can thrive. How do we do that? We ensure that in each of our schools, no matter the level, elementary, middle, or high, we have time set aside that is protected so that focused curriculum can thrive and can continue. We know from a well-renowned national researcher, Dr. Robert Marzano, that the single most important initiative that a school district can adopt to ensure student success is a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And I'm happy to announce that this is work we already started pre-pandemic. We will continue this work. And just like the school improvement process, it's continual. We're never done because we want to make sure that we're always in line with best practice and giving our teachers an opportunity to learn and grow, as well as our students an opportunity to learn and grow. With the guaranteed and viable curriculum, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide for our audience. It's essential to understand that it really does provide guidance about the core curriculum. It gives our staff an opportunity to pinpoint what is most important out of the package of state standards and give focus for our teachers so they can pinpoint what's most important and give every student an equal opportunity to learn, access to a highly effective teacher, and really access to the same content no matter where they are. If they're at one elementary school or another, they're going to have access to the same, and we're going to provide that opportunity to succeed for all students. Naturally, the question now is, how do you do this? What work is being done in the district? What work will continue to be done in the district to ensure that we have this protected or viable guaranteed curriculum that will promote student success? So as you can see on the screen, you have this kind of circular ongoing pattern
that really highlights what we're doing as a district. And the very first thing that we're in the process of doing, or that we may have completed with various grade levels, is we're pinpointing with our teachers what is most essential, what standards are most important out of all of the state standards that students must master, what skills must they have in order to move forward and be successful. Once we can identify those essential standards, which we're working on as a team with our teachers, then we kind of move through this process, as you can see, and we align first and foremost our assessments. Now that we know what to teach, how do we measure what students know? And that would be our assessment alignment. Once our staff has an opportunity to work together with their grade levels, and oftentimes with the grade level above them, to know what students need to know to be prepared for the next grade, then we move on to aligning our resources. What do our teachers need in order to be successful and support their students? You have an example right now in front of you. You have this technology that now we can take learning beyond where we were before and give every student that opportunity to have a device in their hands, not only interact with their teachers and their peers, but allow teachers an opportunity to know, what does Johnny know now that I taught a lesson? What does Susie need for me now that I taught this lesson? So it really gives that opportunity for all teachers to check for understanding, put the brakes on when the brakes need to be put on, go back and reteach, and move forward when the time is right so that all students can succeed. With that continuous process that you see, once we identify those standards, we look at the assessments and identify what needs to be measured. We then pull in the resources that are needed and continue the work. We ensure that our report cards are aligned. And then we talk about best practice, what needs to thrive and exist in the classroom. We know from research that we need to integrate various subject matters. An example of that would be that during an ELA lesson, perhaps we're teaching students how to write a well-structured paragraph. We build in or bring in social studies content so that we're integrating what our students are doing. Naturally, part of that process is to also integrate technology and social emotional learning. But this continual process, it's never done because we're continuing that work. We're dedicated to this work, and we're dedicated first and foremost because we know the research tells us our students will succeed if we refine, if we then work as a team to assess if what we're doing is working and make adjustments along the way. So at this point, you should see on your screen a question pop up. This would be a perfect opportunity for a teacher in a classroom to measure what students know. In this case this evening, privately, our board members can see that question, but for our audience, that question is just an opportunity to recap what I just presented and to check for understanding. So a teacher from the classroom could see who might need extra direction or support in order to move on. So while you answer that question, I'll turn it over to Paul Sibley, our Executive Director of Secondary Education.
I want to give my natural pause so that all of our learners have time to answer their question at an appropriate pace. But as you get done with that and you see the graphic on the screen, to kind of build on what Ms. Licari has been talking about, the whole idea of moving learning forward. A lot of media reports, there's a lot of information out there about the learning gaps that perhaps were created from this school year. And so what I'm going to address is kind of what that looks like post-pandemic, but applying it to exactly what we're talking about. So the goals that we have as a department, these are not brand new. These are not ideas that are only driven by the pandemic. These are all research-driven concepts that we as a team 2 years ago decided was the right approach for our students here in Chippewa Valley. So the graphic you see of the puzzle piece being put back in, I think is an excellent graphic to represent how we're going to move forward at this point and how learning will actually move forward as we go forward. Basically, filling in that piece, you're completing a picture, and that's a key concept. We're not talking about redoing the entire puzzle. The idea of looking at what occurred last year and saying, okay, we've got to just start over. We've got to reteach all those things that could have happened last year. We know that our teachers did an exceptional job under the most difficult circumstances, and that our kids did indeed learn. There was learning going on. It's now our job and our teachers' jobs and our administrators' jobs to identify what the gaps are. So to do that, we have to continue to move forward with our learning. We know that engagement for our students is going to be key. That's where one-to-one technology, strategies that we'll be working on with our teachers are going to come into place so that we can continue to move learning forward while then identifying what those needs are for our students. So the next slide you see, this moving learning forward. You'll hear a lot if you're reading about the Michigan Department of Education, the US Department of Education, they talk about accelerating learning. I want to make sure it's very clear to the board that accelerating learning does not mean going faster. That would be a bad idea. Okay, but accelerating learning is what we are now referring to as moving learning forward. So what we need to do is continue to accelerate and move forward and not assume that we need to reteach everything. If you assume that you have to reteach everything, you're going to have students who are going to lose engagement because they are going to hear things they already know. So what we're going to do is really focus on an approach that, again, is not new. It's something that our teachers are well prepared to handle. It's something that they're aware of. We're going to talk about things like formative assessment. We're going to talk about the guaranteed and viable curriculum and the essential standards we agree upon. So that as we're moving forward, we're teaching those standards. We are using the resources, the strategies that we know, and then we're going to implement what's called just-in-time teaching. At least that's what we refer to it as. Just-in-time means you've identified an issue with a student, and because I'm here as the teacher, I'm going to address that now, right now, while we have it in front of us. And that's the key for our district and our kids to continue to move forward. I mentioned that these are not new ideas. Formative assessment, essential standards, this is work that we have started. This is work that's moving up through all of our levels. And it's where you'll hear later in our presentation how we'll have collaborative teams that'll be in place to support the work that we're doing as a district. So for us, it's really about that engagement piece. And that's what we're most excited about. We know that our kids are excited to be back in school. We know that last year was very hard. So we know that our teachers will have new tools at their disposal within our classrooms, and that they'll be able to utilize tools that they maybe weren't able to use last year. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Langlands, who will go on to our next priority, which is reading.
Well, I can tell by the way you're looking that it appears you've answered your question and you're ready to go. So good evening. I'm Dr. Langlands. And as you know, I am about to replace Mr. Kozlowski as the Executive Director of Innovation and Learning. And I'm going to speak to you about our reading priority in Chippewa Valley. So one critical priority for our district is a shift in the way that we teach reading at the earliest levels. There's recently been significant national attention to what is described as the science of reading. The science of reading is not a program and it's not a specific component of instruction, but rather it's really the emerging consensus on how best to teach reading. It's based on thousands of research studies that have been conducted across the country and across the world. These studies have revealed a great deal about how we learn to read and what kind of instruction is most likely to work the best for most of our students. The graphic on this slide is called the simple view of reading. In the simple view of reading, we see that reading comprehension, which is our outcome, the ability to understand printed text, is the product of two important factors: the ability to decode written text or written words, and the ability to understand spoken language. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. All right. So this first slide here is the simple view of reading, or about the simple view of reading is about decoding written text. So that is the first piece or the first side of the equation. Children first have to learn how to associate a letter or a symbol with sounds. We teach them all of the sounds that can be made with various combinations of letters. This can be very challenging for some students, but is critically important for them to know. Now, the example that you see in front of you, first of all, is written right to left, which is different than the way we normally do. But you have to remember that our students come to school not always knowing that they're supposed to read left to right. They also come to school not knowing the symbols A, B, and C, and the sounds that are associated with those symbols. Or when we put more than one symbol together to make a different sound. So for example, the AI together, or the OUGH as they get older. So I gave you just enough time perhaps to try to decode the very first word, which technically is the last word, the way we read left to right. And that first word is K-I-T, kit. If I'd given you enough time to figure out the whole sentence, you would have seen that it says Kit ran and hid. It took you a little time to decode that first word because the symbols or letters are unfamiliar to you. If students don't know all the letters and letter combinations along with the sounds, they won't be able to read the words on the page. So this is the decoding part of this simple view of reading. Next slide. So now in the second part of the simple view of reading, we're talking about oral language comprehension. We know that students have to have vocabulary and content area or background knowledge in order to understand spoken language. And I can see that you've read this passage. Many people would be able to read every word in this passage, but they would probably not understand some of the vocabulary, and they wouldn't have the content area knowledge, in this case, nuclear physics, to understand what they just read. This is the oral language comprehension side of the simple view of reading. We have to teach our children how to fluently and accurately decode, and we have to give them the opportunity to develop vocabulary and background knowledge in order to understand what they read once they decode it. So what's the connection between reading and a guaranteed and viable curriculum? We know that we must provide evidence-based reading instruction that is systematic and explicit, especially in the early years of a child's education, so that our children can learn to read automatically and fluently. This ability to read will allow them to read textbooks for content area instruction, such as math, science, and social studies. But we also know that in addition to learning to decode words, children must also develop vocabulary and content area knowledge in order to understand or comprehend what they read. So as we teach them to decode increasingly more complicated words, we must also teach them the vocabulary and content knowledge they need to comprehend what they read. A guaranteed and viable curriculum ensures that students will not only learn to read, but will also have access to other core curriculum and the necessary time to learn it, which is integral to learning to read. And I'm going to hand it back to Mr. Sibley.
Clicker's not playing nice. It wants to jump way ahead. All right, I'm going to talk about social emotional learning. I'll just start by saying this is not a new concept. Social emotional learning is something that Chippewa Valley schools and most school districts are going to spend time on with students. Our students come to school with academic needs. They also come to school with social and emotional needs. This looks very different at all ages. In recent years, our staffs in each of our buildings at all levels have really dedicated themselves to making sure that we're addressing these needs of our students in different ways. And they may look a little different in each building, especially from elementary to secondary buildings, but they all have something in place when it comes to SEL. So when you consider what SEL is, I actually heard a podcast and they referenced this. It was very simple, but I thought it was very appropriate. You just read it backwards. So essentially SEL is just the learning of emotional and social skills. And that's all SEL is. And it's something that, again, every kid comes to school with, and it's something that we equip them with. The idea of why social emotional learning is important is because what it really does is it opens up the gates for students to really focus on their academic learning. It lets them really learn to the capacity that they can learn to, because other things, other non-academic needs aren't in their way. So by removing, or I shouldn't say removing in all cases, but addressing those social emotional needs, what you're really doing is building the capacity for learning in each one of our students, because they're able to focus more on the academic side of things. So to give you some examples of what social emotional learning looks like in Chippewa Valley schools, if you have elementary age students, you might be familiar with programs such as Leader in Me, Second Step, Positivity Project. These are social emotional learning programs that we have in our district. At all of our buildings, you have PBIS programs. You have, at the secondary level, you'll hear things about wellness days, wellness weeks, the Be the Change program. Not to mention that our teachers have been through a lot of training as it relates to trauma and resilience throughout our district. And these are all components of what Chippewa Valley is addressing as social emotional needs. We also know that after the pandemic, our kids are going to come with some different needs than they had prior to the pandemic and the learning that took place last year. So we'll be prepared to address those needs so that the academic components and their ability to learn at their highest potential is seen. So again, this work has been going on for quite some time. Our goal is to make sure that as we go across the district and we talk about our guaranteed and viable curriculum, that we also apply it to social emotional learning, that we're identifying the key concepts that should be taught at each level, whether it's at the elementary level where you're talking about relationship building and listening skills and being able to verbalize their needs and what they're going through, versus at secondary level where you're now talking about stress and how to cope with stress and anxiety, perhaps depression. And those are the pieces that we know that we have to be aware of, that we have to be able to address with our students, again, in order to really maximize the experience that they have in our schools as they grow into young adults. So at this point, we will go back to some technology here, and Miss Monier White will come down and talk about the new tools. And I apologize, I meant to reference earlier, you have a handout called Preparing to Accelerate that I was going to reference and I failed to do so. And that is going to give you a little bit more information about the acceleration of learning that I mentioned and putting the pieces together. It'll give you some ideas of what you might see in the classroom as well.
I'll give you a minute to finish the question that popped up on your screen. Looks like we are wrapping up. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead and forward for me, Paul. Great. So as we talk about technology and one-to-one and how that works with our district priorities, I'm very excited about the possibilities. Our teachers have access to such a wide variety of software and tools that can help us help our students with learning. So one way is through just gauging student understanding or formative assessment. And as we talk about moving learning forward and fitting in puzzle pieces, one thing we can do is just instantaneously get results from students about what they understand. So for example, the questions that you're answering tonight as they pop on your screen on this tablet, which is just like the tablets our teachers have in their classroom, I can instantaneously get those results. I can look at, I get little bar graphs and pie graphs and I could look and so far you're all doing wonderful. But let's say I had a question come up and 90% of you got it wrong. I would immediately know there was something I needed to address with my students. There's a puzzle piece that's missing. And a lot of times that might just be misunderstanding the question. It might be looking at the question with the students and trying to determine the context. It might be that they forgot a math skill and we need to go back and review it. But I can address that immediately in the classroom. And teachers are really good at doing that. And when they can get them information instantaneously, a lot of times they can address a misconception or a missing piece in a matter of minutes and then continue to move forward with the lesson. The other thing they can do is see that maybe the class is half and half. They might need to do some individualized instruction. They might need to work with a few students at a time. But again, instead of going home and sorting through papers and trying to do some data analysis, they have immediate results in their classroom. So that allows them to immediately address the issues or just know that they're comfortable to move forward with the lesson. The one-to-one technology will also help us with individualizing instruction. A few weeks ago, the board approved the purchase of a program called Lexia. Lexia is a reading program, and one thing it does is assess students where they're at and then provide students with practice in the areas they specifically need help with. So having access to those computers, teachers can provide time in class. They might be working with a small group of students who need help with phonics. And I'm not a reading specialist, so Dr. Langlands might tell me I'm wrong. But they can be working on one skill with the teacher, and then the other students in the class who maybe have already mastered that skill can be working on their computers to, again, individualize lessons and focus to move them forward with what they're working on. So it provides tools to allow us to differentiate. It also allows our teachers to really depend on students having access to at-home practice and learning. Many of our students have devices, but we haven't always known what they are. You don't know what web browser they have or what software they have, so you don't know if the lesson you plan in the classroom, if it's technology-based, if it will work when the students go home. Well, being able to provide one-to-one technology, we know what the students now have in their hands. We can test, we can provide the programs that we know work with our computers, and we can, with confidence, send students home to continue work outside of the classroom and practice. And also, for a long time, technology has really been touted as a way to break down the walls of the classroom, to connect us with people outside of our school. Even before COVID hit, we had a couple teachers who started doing virtual field trips. We had a second grade class who in 1 year went to Antarctica, the Bahamas, and Yellowstone. And that was all using virtual technology. So these devices will allow students to pursue different interests, pursue their passions, give them a lot more choice when we talk about problem-based learning or project-based learning. Students, by having a device, they have a lot more ability to change what they want to do. One student might want to make a video because that is something they're passionate about. Another student might choose to do something more like a PowerPoint presentation. They all have the tools they need. So we can give them more voice and choice. And modern workplace skills, we're all pretty dependent on these devices. So again, having the one-to-one technology allows us to teach students to use that responsibly and really bring them up in a, help ingrain the skills there. So I'm going to pop up one more question for you and give you a minute to answer that. Our next speaker is Mr. John Cafagna. He is our coordinator of data and assessment, and he's going to talk to you about some things we're going to do to accomplish these priorities and work towards them.
Thank you and good evening. So as we look at all the different things that we've seen here today, the district has really been thinking, okay, how are we going to make these processes become a reality? How are we going to accomplish our goals in a guaranteed and viable curriculum, in reading, in the moving learning forward, in technology? And it really came down to having a solid foundation set up in our schools that's even stronger than what we've had before, because we have a history of having a strong foundation in this district, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave any stone unturned, that we didn't have any cracks in that foundation, because these are so important moving forward that we could not take a chance. So as we did that, we started saying, okay, what could we use to be the vehicle to do that? And what we did is we found the idea of collaborative teams, which has been around for a while, but it's something that we said, okay, with a collaborative team set up in our buildings, now we can really have that solid foundation necessary for us to move this learning forward. So what is a collaborative team? It's the strategic group of staff members within our schools who use an intentional process of cooperation to achieve better results for our students. That intentional process is such an important piece because as we teach, as we work in our schools, we have so many things going on that when you're talking about the foundation, there's so many other things that could distract us from our core, from our mission, from what we're trying to accomplish, that what we really need to make sure is that we're very, very intentional, that we have the process, that we have this foundation ready. And we feel that collaborative teams is going to do that. And we found this idea through the research that's been out there. We've been talking a lot about research here tonight, and the research out there in collaborative teams really shows that with that, we can look at all these different pieces. And specifically, we're going to talk about assessments. We're going to talk about data. We're going to talk about analyzing that data. Go back to that. To really accomplish that goal. So in our district, we've been looking, and in our county, we've been looking at the idea of collaborative teams since about 2011. That's when it first kind of hit our county. And we've been kind of hearing about it for that long, but we really took a big dive into it in about 2019. In February, one of our schools really took into the collaborative team idea. Our administrators went to a training that summer, and it's been growing ever since. You can see on the screen the different schools that have really embraced this process. I've worked with most of these schools myself personally, building that collaborative team process. And we expect in 2021 to be able to hit all schools in some form or fashion to make sure that solid foundation is ready to go for us to move all these different pieces forward. So when you think about collaborative teams, really, once we have that team set up that can collaborate, it could be an intentional process. Now we can move in different directions. For example, you might have heard of professional learning communities, which has been a big buzzword in education for a while. If we have a collaborative team that truly works together intentionally, then we can move into those professional learning communities, which will help us develop the guaranteed and viable curriculum that we were talking about before, will help us with our reading, because teachers will be working together as a team. And we really learned that during the pandemic, how isolation really hurt so many of us. When we were stuck at home, when we couldn't go to our favorite places, that was us personally. Professionally, we just take that to the next level and say, if we work with the team intentionally together in schools, we're going to be making that much more of a difference. But not only PLCs and professional learning communities, but we could also have our team work on behavior skills if we're seeing certain behaviors in our buildings. We can work with the social and emotional learning piece and say, okay, how can our team help our students with any issues that might be going on with them socially or emotionally? So these collaborative teams are really going to be an important piece. And I'm really looking forward to working with more and more schools this year on this process. So as we continue on, bring back.
Thanks, Mr. Ferryman. All right, so in addition to collaborative teams as one vehicle that will move our teachers, our district staff forward with our district priorities, we are also engaged in continuous professional learning. And so in addition to collaborative teams, we've got, we're working with professional learning supports to guarantee our guaranteed and viable curriculum, reading, social emotional learning, and technology to support learning. We're going to make sure that we're providing teachers with the knowledge and the support that they need to be successful. The professional learning opportunities began last year, and they're going to continue this year. Ken Williams will kick off another year of working on collaborative teams, and John will continue his work with developing the foundations and facilitating collaborative teams. Our technology department will run differentiated opportunities for teachers to learn how to integrate technology into their curriculum. To support reading instruction, we have top 10 tools, letters, and FastBridge training. So we're going to make sure that our teachers are learning what they need to learn on the road to evidence-based reading instruction. And elementary teachers will review the curriculum refinement that occurred in the 1920 school year as they continue the process of developing and guaranteeing their guaranteed and viable curriculum in all core subjects. We have additional school business days planned this year for secondary teachers to begin the process of curriculum refinement so that they can move toward a more guaranteed and viable curriculum in their content areas. And so we are done with the major portion of the 4 district priorities, and I'm going to turn the next portion over to Mr. Sutherland.
So,
The one-to-one technology, is it being distributed at all levels, starting kindergarten, or are we starting at a different age or grade level?
Yes, the one-to-one technology will be available K-12. In our elementary classrooms, K through 5, we're providing a cart in each classroom. Feedback from teachers said that they didn't see themselves sending those home on a regular basis. And if the kids don't need to take them home, it's less risk to not take them home. So they'll have a cart, but each student in the class will have a laptop assigned. So if the teacher wants to send the laptops home for a project or anything like that, it'll be available. In
Oh.
our 6-12 schools, students will take their laptop back and forth each day and will be provided with a case.
Okay, so is the, are all of the carts, will they have new technology? We're in a position that do we have to use some of our older laptops?
We are using some of our older ones. Keep in mind, we have close to 1,500 computers that we purchased just 2 years ago
Right.
for middle school ELA. So it would be a shame to just send those out to pasture. They're still really good
absolutely.
computers. And then we do have some of our older computers that are 5 to 6 years old. Those will mainly be in the carts. Again, we think they're easier to maintain.
Mhm.
But they're perfect. They're the computers our students have been using for the last year. As we've been going through them this summer, if they need a new hard drive or a new battery, we're replacing all that. So they're pretty refreshed and should be great devices.
Okay, did we gather the data from the teachers through a survey, or how did we get through a survey?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
In January, as we
As far
started
as the
planning.
going back and forth in
Yes.
elementary level, correct?
Yep.
Okay, great. I just wanted to clarify for myself and for the community in an effort of transparency for them and myself to fully understand how that's going to be distributed. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
so are there any other questions from that segment? And they don't all have to be asked now. They can be asked at the end of the entire presentation. But if you have any others that you want to ask right now, please do so. Okay. All right. I just want to, before we move on to the next part, I just want to make a couple comments. So you have a document in your folder this evening on instructional priorities, which the Educational Services Department just talked about. And if you would just look at that for a second and just think about that. If you look at those priorities and you think of how they all fit together. So if you look at the second priority, which is reading, and reading we know is the key to everything. It's the key to student learning. I mean, we do have some students who struggle with learning to read that compensate in other ways. And they can have success even not reading well. But of course, our goal is to teach all kids to read to the best of their ability. So that's kind of a pure academic goal. And it's about how teachers instruct in the classroom, how the kids learn. Because we need to have students reach a certain level of independence as a reader to have success. Now, the social emotional part kind of unlocks how kids can use their learning constructively. I mean, as workers in a society, we interact with each other quite often, especially in our area. When you look at the industrial background of our area, kids leave us and they go to jobs that in almost all occupations, not all, they work as part of a team. So having kids understand themselves, understand others, how you work together, that's what gives kids success with this skill. And technology is really purely a tool for both a learner and a teacher. And all of this fits together of what we're trying to do across the district of guaranteeing an equitable curriculum wherever you attend school in our school district. Now, that sounds somewhat maybe to some people easy. These are very difficult goals. They're very challenging goals. You have to, in order to have success, you cannot dictate by memo. You can't send a memo out to your staff saying, this is what we need you to do. You must build support. You must build buy-in. That's so much the part of administration, is to work with teachers to do that. Because you need to have the buy-in in order for there to be success in each and every classroom. So this is a slow, methodical process. This is not something that at the end of 1 year, we're going to say, okay, now we're ready to move on to new goals. The stuff is really continuously happens in our school district. There's a couple of sayings I like, and one is you're either improving or declining. You're never standing still. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to create a culture of improvement in our district. In order to do that, we have to work with those people who are closest to instruction, which is our teachers. Once we have their buy-in, their understanding, and their understanding of the need to do these things, then we have success. So when they talk about collaboration, that's what that's all about. And as I said, it's a laborious process, a fun process. I don't want to in any way indicate that it's should be done any other way, to just do something quicker. Because another one of my favorite sayings is, if you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go fast, you go alone. Well, we want to go far. So these will be ongoing goals that not only are goals this year, but probably be goals into the future. And it's something we'll always be working towards. So I just want to recognize our educational services team for putting together such a comprehensive plan for our school district. This is something that since I've been here as superintendent has been important to me. And that is that regardless of where a student attends school in our school district, they receive an equitable education. So that's our goal. So now I will turn, you want to say something, Denise? Go ahead, right ahead.
Another question. So these very well put together like explanations, are these things that we're going to distribute to parents as well, so that they understand what our priorities are for their students? Or, I mean, I'm not saying, it just seemed, or do you think this would be confusing, in some cases? I don't know.
I think some of that information obviously will get out to the community, whether it's in that format or not. It might be through building communication, kind of understanding goals, different curriculum nights, depending on what level you're at.
Okay.
But essentially, this is language that we will be speaking to our staffs. So hopefully it's a language that parents will hear through conversations as well as through potentially notifications.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if we're good there, then I think we're going to go to Scott.
Okay, so obviously these 4 goals are associated with providing extra services to students. And typically when you have to add extra student services, there's a cost to that. So I would hope many of you are thinking, well, how are we going to pay for this? And fortunately, with the federal and state governments, they've provided additional funding called the ESSER funds. And it is additional allocation that's been provided by both the federal and state governments that are grant-based to address these types of situations, these types of trying to get students back to addressing any type of lost learning that is involved in over a year now. So I'm hopeful with the next slide that this looks somewhat familiar. We reviewed this back in April. Basically what this shows is are the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, which are being allocated by both the state and federal governments to our district. Back in April, quite a few of these numbers were estimates. There wasn't officially an allocation. We were estimating many of these numbers based upon enrollment and information that we had from both the federal and state government. But as it stands right now, all of these funds have now been approved and have already been allocated or will be allocated moving forward sometime this year. So if you notice from this chart, basically there has been the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds are basically the federal funds being provided to our district. The ESSER 2 funds are about 4.7 million, and the ESSER 3 funds are about 10.5 million. In addition to that, there's been some state supplemental funds under ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. ESSER 2 is about 2.3 million, and ESSER 3 is about 6.4 million. So total, with all four funding sources, the district stands to receive about $23.9 million. As it sits right now, we have spent about 3.1 million of those funds, which leaves us a balance of about $20.8 million. The $3.1 million were the cameras that you agreed to purchase, I think back in June, and then the streaming cost from last school year. So as it sits right now, $20.8 million is what we have left in both the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds that have been allocated to the district. One thing that I want to make you aware of is the ESSER 3 funds. There is a 20% mandatory set aside of those funds, which is about $3.4 million to quote, and these are words right out of the grant, address lost learning. So when you look at the $20.8 million still left to spend, 3.4 million of those dollars have to be used to address lost learning. Are there any questions on this slide?
I have a question, Scott. So the ESSER, the 3%, or I mean 20% funds, did we use some of those funds this year for summer school at no cost to parents?
So as it stands right now, yes, summer school would be considered part of those funds. So yes, you could use part of those or some of those summer school funds to address the lost learning, which is a 3.4 million. So yes,
Okay.
I have not included any of those costs in this because obviously it's ongoing costs. Didn't start till after July 1. So once
Right.
I have a handle on those costs, I can update this and we can.
And this isn't like calendar year type spending, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it can be spent over whatever length
Right.
of time.
So if you look at that last column, those are the spend by dates that we have to spend this money.
Okay,
So you can see, depending on the source, are the different spend by dates. So the ESSER 3 funds
I
go out until 2024 that we have to spend them by. ESSER 2 is, from the federal standpoint, 2023, and then the state ESSER 2 funds are through 6/30/22.
okay.
As of right now, we don't have any guidance on the ESSER 3 state supplemental funds and when those have to be spent.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep. Are there any other questions? All right, next slide, please. One of the things that you obviously have to keep in mind, and we discussed this back in April, are these funds are one-time funds. So one of the areas that concerns me are when you have one-time grant funds, many of the services that we would be providing, we have to be aware of or cognizant of not create the sustainability of those services. So if we were to add, staff to a building, once these funds run out, the question becomes what happens when the funds run out and how would we pay for those services moving forward? So when we build our plan, when we move forward and we look at the priorities, that's the one thing that we have to keep in mind, that we don't want to have a cliff where once the money's out, we have $2, $3, $4, $5 million worth of services that we want to continue in the district that would require us to find other ways to fund those projects. So we have to keep that in mind when we develop the plan. And then when we identify those priorities, when we look at identifying those priorities, again, you have to be cognizant of what those are and are they sustainable moving into the future. And that's what we're working on right now. And we're in the process of between meetings and discussions of what that's going to look like moving forward. Right.
Thank you, Scott. To follow up on what Scott just mentioned, you can see that we have our priorities where our ESSER funds will be used to support the 4 priorities. And we've really made a conscientious effort to ensure that these are this one-time money is spent in that way. We did try not to move forward with any type of spending that would go beyond. So some of the proposals for our 4 priorities are for curriculum resources, materials and licenses in alignment with the guaranteed and viable curriculum. Also, reading resources and the training costs that are associated with them. We also will be talking and investigating social emotional learning resources and programs for schools. Many schools have these types of programs already in place. We need to take a look at whether or not our other schools can avail themselves of that as well, such as Leader in Me, the Positivity Project, PBIS, Second Step, and Trauma and Resiliency. We're looking at tools such as SABERS, which is the acronym for Social Academic Emotional Behavior, and SWIS, which is School-Wide Information System. And those are supposed to collect behavior data, and that's what we will be using those programs for. We also want to provide robust professional learning related to the instructional priorities during our district-provided professional development days, such as guest speakers and other resources. Our plan is to provide after-school programs at each level, with elementary focusing on reading and math interventions, and secondary a focus on content area homework help. Then finally, to identify the needs of our students and plan academic and behavioral support programs based on those needs. Next slide, please. Question?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Sedlin talked about the one-time monies being spent, and being careful not to have programming where the ESSR funds run out, where we have to support that through general fund money. But in looking at the slides here, many of these resources that we're looking to support with our ESSER funds are already in the schools already. So that will be a net gain for our general fund, because the ESSER money will be covering the costs of some, not all of them, but a lot of those we have already in our programming. So that will be a boost to our general fund, Mr. Sutton?
Yes, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Bednar.
And a lot of these items, some of them are also being funded out of grant funds as it sits right now, existing grant funds. So as we've been looking at these priorities, obviously one of the strategies that we're considering, if it's 3, 4, 5 years out, is there a way to free up other grant funds to support these types of programs moving forward? So it's all in the discussion phases where, okay, the nice part is it isn't like we have to spend this all by next year. So we're going to have some time to really figure out, identify our priorities and identify exactly what we want to use to address those priorities in a more long-term process than just, all right now and then have the huge cliff at the end of this.
Okay. And these are, we also have a increase in our foundation allowance coming, correct? And that is something that's a fund That's separate from our ESSER funds.
Correct.
So we will have resources too, even though maybe we use one-time money because of these increases, substantial increases this district is going to get in the state of Michigan. We should be able to sustain these programs regardless. Should be able to.
Well, it's a whole different other discussion regarding the increase in the per pupil funding level and all that. There are some caveats with that. There's some fine print. When you look at the increase, the almost $600 per pupil increase that we're receiving this school year in per pupil funding, that is wonderful news. The offset to that, though, is one of the areas that is not being funded in this current school year that was last year was about $6 million worth of one-time funding to hold our funding level where it was based upon the decline in enrollment. So while the $600 per pupil sounds great, it is awesome. The one thing that you also have to be cognizant of is we also lost funds because that super blend for the pupil count changed. It was only in for 1 year, and that affects our budget also.
Great point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So there's a 3-year plan for allocating the ESSER funds to address the district priorities, and that starts in 2021. In fact, as was mentioned a few minutes earlier, summer school is already in progress, and the funding for summer school will be covered through ESSER funds. Educational services will continue to work with the business department and with human resources regarding allocation of ESSER funds during this 3-year period. Next slide, please. Well, we hope that this workshop has provided you with a better understanding of the district's instructional priorities and how collaborative teams and professional learning apply to these priorities to ensure success for our teachers and, most importantly, for our students. The handouts were mentioned a little bit earlier, but they are the instructional priorities and also preparing to accelerate or moving forward with learning. It might be beneficial for you to take a look at those. And if you do have any questions about that and you want to ask at another time, feel free to contact the Educational Services Department and we can go over it with you. Please change the slide. We'd like to thank you for your time this evening. We're happy to answer any questions you may have at this time, or there'll be one more slide that you'll be able to type in a question on your laptop, and we can review those and we can get back to you as soon as possible. What questions might you have for our team?
Questions by the board?
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your work on behalf of the board this evening. I'm putting this workshop together, educating us on what we're doing here in Chippewa Valley Schools with not only our funding, but also how we're going to remediate for this pandemic with these children and our plan to do that. And it looks substantial and wholesome. So thank you for your work on behalf of the board. Okay, hearing further comment or questions, I believe I will call for a motion to adjourn. We could do it by the board, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, feel free.
I appreciate the work that was done by the Educational Services Department, and I'm glad that I feel that we've made great growth in the last 6 years because of the changes in our structure, our having curricular leaders. And so I think we've made great strides. And I think what you presented tonight will continue to further our educational value to each student greatly, especially with the social emotional that is happening on a regular basis in today's world. I would like to talk a little bit about there was some things, this was a great information, although I think another workshop at some point might be good, because I think part of the things that we wanted to talk about, and I'm guilty of not sending in my email, so I'm not gonna blame anybody, is maybe some board relationship stuff, trusting one another. It's been a very, I know the community is upset with us, but for us as a board, it's been, it's a challenging year. You have new board members that came in at a time that is unprecedented and very challenging to get through the meetings and understand what it's like to really be a board member before they've been inundated with challenges. So if at some point we can do that, I think that would be very helpful. And I can send an email about what I'm talking about. I'd also like to thank the community members. I'll be emailing Ms. Radko to understand more about her survey and how it was conducted and, distributed, and what percentage of people responded, how many people it was sent out to. So I'll send you an email with some of my questions because I'm very interested in that. So I'd like to thank you for that. And that's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, maybe perhaps we could have, I think in the past for the board, some of our workshops, for board workshops, we had brought on the help of officials from MASP who ran a workshop for us for the board. I don't know, maybe we could look into that, find a person to moderate for a workshop on what Mr. Queen.
Yes, I've already reached out, and it's just a matter of, it was not something that could be put together for this evening, but I have some good sources and I'll be having some conversations and I'll bring that back to you.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else from the board? The board. Okay. Hearing none. I have a motion to adjourn, please. By Ms. Aquino. Supported by Dr. Andriasco. Roll call vote, Ms. Patton, please.
Yes.
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 Great. And one more thing I wanted to wish Ms. Edlin a happy 34th birthday.
Happy birthday, Kim.
Thank you for coming.